Hello everyone, my name is Adam Kruger and this is my Lit Ideas series, and today we're getting into another book review. Now, if you were just saying, Adam, I wonder if you could recommend a book that deals with Stalinist Russia and Pontius Pilate and 1930s and theological and political and philosophical satire and Satan, well, guess what? I just happen to have a great book recommendation for you, and that is today's Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov, whose name I'm certain that I'm mispronouncing slightly because mispronunciation is kind of my thing, especially when it comes to Russian literature. Although I do have to admit he's not nearly as frustrating as Dostoevsky, in which I don't know if I can correctly pronounce a single character's name in Crime and Punishment, let alone Brothers Karamazov. But anyways, this book was published posthumously by the author because it was written in the height of Stalinist Russia, and back in the day, in that time and place, if you wrote things that were a bit satirical and that were slightly critical of the way you were doing things in your political ideology, they didn't really like it too much. So they tended to just not let you say those things. It was kind of a thing back then. But anyways, thankfully we have it now, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's my third time reading it, although it's been about a decade, and I appreciate it more and more, not only because it's so layered, but also because now, as opposed to then, I'm considerably more read in Russian literature, and I know a lot more about Stalinist Russia and Russian history. But I would say this, that if you don't know nothing about any of these things, and if you've never read a Russian novel and know nothing about Russian history, I still think that you'll be able to enjoy it, although certainly the more you know about those subjects, the greater the satire will hit. Because it's really hilarious, clever stuff. But again, if you know nothing, it's still going to be interesting, fun, fast-paced, and just engaging. It really has great characters. The prose is beautiful. The dialogue's excellent. The love story is sweeping and epic and so weird. I mean, this book, if anything, it is absolutely weird and insane, and pretty much betrays all conventions. The guy who you think is going to be the narrator at the beginning, a poet who ends up going insane once he meets the devil, only comes back later and basically exists so that you can, about a third of the way through, meet the actual hero or protagonist, if you will. If this book even really has one, which is kind of arguable because the main character, arguably, is Satan, and at best he's an anti-hero. Now, in this particular case, Satan, he's more of a archetypal trickster than anything. I mean, he's not pure evil. He's not here like, Nero to watch the whole city burn while he's playing the harp or anything like that. He's more of a joker, and ironically enough, he ends up being kind of the savior at the end. Although still, he's Satan, and as you would guess, he's up to some shady business. But it's all great. And you may ask, well, why is Satan the main character in this book? And well, it worked for Milton for one thing. But beyond that, a little bit of history about the author. His father was a theological lecturer. And if you don't know anything about Russian literature specifically tends to be, about a conversation with other Russian literature, as all world literature is to some extent. But they really tend to build off the themes, tropes, ideas of past Russian greats, like Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, etc. And if you've never read any of those, a common theme throughout authors like Dostoevsky, like Tolstoy, like Pasternak, is that Christianity, or at least the ideals of Christianity, are somewhat of an anecdote to the chaos and the hell that is Stalinist Russia and communism and all of that awful stuff. And that those kind of theories have been popularized by the likes of conservative thinkers like Jordan Peterson. Now, I don't tend to agree with that, but you can tell that Bulgakov is kind of piggybacking off that and carrying that strand along through to use certain religious ideals to kind of mock, mimic, and satirize just the hellhole that is Soviet Stalinist Russia. But because he's using satire, Jesus Christ himself, even though he actually does show up in the novel in a few different ways, is arguably not the best vehicle for satire unless you're Christopher Moore, but even then he had Biff do all the funny stuff. If you haven't read Lamb, that's probably another review I'll get to in the near future, and it's great. Probably not as smart, but probably just as hilarious. Anyways, we're getting sidetracked. So, it's really interesting because he both kind of picks apart certain theological aspects, dives into the history of Christianity in a really weird, very humanized, very grounding way, and looks at the character of Jesus, which is called Yahshua in here for linguistic reasons that are far too complicated to get into now. But anyways, Yahshua, Jesus, same thing, whatever. But he kind of picks it apart in some sense, but also, in a way simultaneously acknowledges the validity of that line of thought in the history of Christianity and etc. Well, again, kind of demonstrating its shortcomings like any good trickster does, kind of dissecting the constraints and the frameworks and the political, theological, philosophical underpinnings of their society, and kind of shows how it's all a bunch of nonsense and we're all just, living in chaos, basically. But like I said, he's funny, he's hilarious, and he ends up being not as bad of a guy as you would think for good old Lucifer. Hail Satan. So, anyways, Satan comes to Moscow, anyways, in the 1930s, and he comes with a band of people that is just some of the most interesting, cool characters you can ever imagine. There's a vampire, because, why not? There's a 6-foot-tall, vodka-drinking, chess-playing black cat, because, again, why the hell not? There's a bureaucrat, which only makes sense if you're going to be hanging out with Satan. You kind of need one of those, right? And there's a red-haired demon named Azelzalo or something. The name's a little tricky to pronounce. Again, his pronunciation kind of being my thing. But basically, what they do is they wreak havoc. They show how everything is somewhat of a joke, while acknowledging, while simultaneously deconstructing other religious attitudes. And it's really, really great stuff. One of the best scenes in the whole thing satirizes, or kind of plays out in a satirical way, a concept that, or a line from George Orwell, you could say. I don't know if you probably wouldn't say that it was initially inspired from Orwell because, timelines and stuff. But the line from him, anyways, is that in Stalinist Russia, it's like the workers pretended to work and, the government pretended to pay them. And you see this play out in the most delightful, hilarious, and super clever way imaginable. And beyond all of this, I did mention it's a love story. Two of the main characters are the Master and Margarita. The Master is a novelist / ex-novelist who's currently being found at the insane asylum, from the poet who initially meets the devil, named Professor Roland in this book, in the beginning of the novel, and becomes unhinged and is perceived as insane and is therefore sent to the insane asylum, and that's how this all comes about. And Margarita, you might ask who Margarita is, and well, she's the Master's former lover, who ends up becoming friends with Roland, aka the devil, who sells her soul to her so that she can be back together with her former lover. He's able to do this, and he's able to do just about everything for them. The whole thing climaxes in Satan's Grandmaster Ball, which is as cool as it sounds, if not way cooler. And he's able to bring these two together, and he's able to offer them peace. And he actually ends up talking to Jesus, and Jesus says, well, he's not exactly welcome to the club, so you can't do that. And the devil's like, well, I'm not that bad of a guy, I don't want to send him to hell or anything, so at least we can do peace. And again, this kind of demonstrates the limitations perhaps that Christianity has, while at the same time acknowledging that there's maybe certain ideas with it that are, better, I'd say, than what you have in Stalinist Russia. And it plays out in really interesting, super layered, three-dimensional ways that you could probably endlessly discuss and talk about and debate. And that's one of the coolest things about this, is the whole thing is incredibly convoluted, but convoluted might be a strong word, but it's incredibly layered, it's incredibly complex, and yes, it's a bit contradictory in parts. And to go back to the Pontius Pilate thing, obviously Satan, it's inferred, if not explicitly stated, that he knew Pontius Pilate, and he begins telling some people about these stories, which causes some insanity and some turmoil. And as it happens, the novel that the master was writing was a novel about Pontius Pilate and about his time and relationship with Jesus, with Judas, with all of those great characters from that old wacky, kooky book from way back when. And it's all pretty great, and it meshes well. Obviously, the Pontius Pilate stuff is far more serious, but thematically, it's linked. It's linked throughout characters. It's linked throughout several clever plot devices, including some meta narratives that are thrown in there, in which the narrator is, becomes a person who's actually talking to the reader, and he kind of helps guide you through all of this chaos. And that's all I'm about to say on it. As far as negatives, I mean, you can disagree with some of the ideas. Also, as in the habit of a lot of Russian authors, they tend to stop and break things down just a little bit too much, and I'd rather have the narrative speak for itself a little bit more. And while it is very fast-paced, sometimes there's chunks where you feel like the author really likes the sound of his own voice. No book is perfect. Although this one is about as close as you're going to get when it comes to satires dealing with Satan and Stalinist Russia. And I can't recommend it enough. Once again, it is Master and the Margarita. Check it out. It'll make you smart, or at least it'll make you look smart when you talk about it to other people. So there's always that. You have that going for you. Anyways, once again, this is Adam Kruger. Lit Ideas, like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. And we'll see you again soon for a graphic novel series review. Yeah?